talk to them about the profession and about how important it is to still be in this profession now more than ever was my small way of doing something, trying to share these ideas with people and hopefully help inspire them to keep going in the profession that they've chosen.
I talked to a couple of girls at the end of your speech and asked them if they wanted to continue or to go on this and continue to teach. And they said they felt like they were needed now more than ever. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do. We need to teach kids how to advocate for themselves and how to think critically, how to speak their minds and put words together in ways that are effective. And they're not going to learn those things without good teachers. They need us in this potentially dangerous, confusing world. They need those skills to be able to change these things.
But now we have guns. Is that different?
Well, we've always had guns. I mean, I don't necessarily think the guns they're certainly not the entire problem. I think that, the gun debate is certainly something that needs to be discussed, and we need to figure out a better solution to it than what we have. But I think maybe the bigger problem is the polarization that we're experiencing in society. And part of what we do as educators is try to get students and people in general to maybe consider things from other sides, not just, this is my opinion and this is what's right and I don't care what you say, you're wrong. So I think that that's what we need, is people who are more willing to listen and more willing to consider that even though you might not agree with me, maybe you have a point, and maybe we can find something that we agree upon to work together and move forward. And I think we're lacking that. So I think that's why we need teachers now more than ever.
What do you think went wrong in this specific situation at your school? Do you think that the system that was created to catch the warning signs, catch people who were kind of, drifting, do you think it failed?
I think that there were a lot of things that people did right, and I think that there were a lot of things that didn't necessarily go right. I don't know all of the specifics, and that would be more of a question for local law enforcement and things like that. So I don't want to speak to those things because I'm not really familiar with their system and the things that happened. So I wouldn't want to say anything, that would be sort of out of place. I don't know that I can really answer that question. Sorry.
But what will change about your behavior in the classroom going forward?
We talk about everything in my classroom, and I've tried to allow my students to have a forum to discuss their concerns and their opinions in a sort of a safe space. From now on, I'll obviously continue to do that, but I think that I will also approach my students as much as I like to think that I, am not all business all the time. There's so much that we have to cover in the classroom, and sometimes that sort of overshadows the life skills and the communication skills and those things. And so I think as much as it is important to focus on those things, I'll focus on them in a different way, and allow, in the context of teaching the standards and practicing the standards that we have to practice in a classroom, we'll do it in a way that is maybe more meaningful and allows students the opportunity to feel like they're doing something that might help them in, real life later on. So.
What was your impression of the discussion this morning and the questions that were asked of you? And I know you joked at the beginning about the lack of involvement right away, but things seem to get rolling. What were your impressions of that?
I mean, I think that's how it always is, especially, nobody talks on the first day of class, so this was my sort of first day of class here. I thought it went really well. I was seeing a lot, even before, I asked the question of the audience. I was seeing a lot of nods and a lot of, body language. They talk a lot about body language in education classes. If a kid is leaning forward, it means they're listening to, all those things. And I was seeing a lot of that. Afterwards, when I had several students come up to me and just, give me hugs, and that's what I was really hoping to do. Not necessarily for the hugs, although I like hugs, but more just to know that I reached them and what I said was meaningful to them. And I feel like I did that successfully. So I feel really good about it.
What did you learn here at IU during your 4 years that helped you and your students navigate that day?
Well, I was an English major when I was here. I did not major in education, but I was involved with union board and a lot of different things on campus. And I think that being at such a large university, I came from a very small high school. I graduated with, 112 people in my graduating class, so pretty small. Coming to such a large university and being exposed to such a diverse population, and, it's really sort of helped me look at the world in a different way, which I appreciate. As far as on that specific day, that day was more about the drills that we had done as a district and as a school, as far as, this is where you need to be, this is what you need to do, this is how we're going to communicate, this, all of those things were sort of the things that sort of helped my instincts kick in as far as what we needed to be doing at the time. So, yeah.
When it comes to moving forward with your students in the classroom and, having those meaningful conversations, but still meeting the standards as a teacher, what kind of guidance have you been provided to make that happen, if any? And what are you kind of using to make that outline moving forward?
Our administration is wonderful, and they are very supportive of the teachers. They have talked about, they sort of give us a lot of freedom and leeway in the classroom, and they give us the ability to sort of handle it as we feel is appropriate for our particular classroom and our students. I do know that there have been some lesson plans. Actually, my husband is at the school today. Today was the teacher's first day back. And so I imagine that today and then Monday and Tuesday when we're at school, there will be, sort of discussion on how do we do this? How do we go back into the classroom, and what types of things are we going to discuss and things like that. So until now, it's been very much supporting the emotional needs of the students and the teachers. And so I think Monday it'll be sort of figuring out the logistics of what our classrooms are going to look like now and how we're going to handle this.
When the alarm went off and you guys probably locked your room or did what you did you then just get information totally from your cell phone, or when did you realize how bad it was? When you walked out of the room?
We had evacuated for a fire drill, and then when we heard that it was a code red, came back in, my first instinct was it was a code red drill. It really never entered my mind that it could be real. It just never, I don't know if it was denial or what it was, but, and then our first clue that something was really happening was one of my students got a phone call from his sister, and she was in the building with the shooter, and she was saying, no, there's, we hear gunshots. And so that was our first clue that this is real, something's happening. And then my husband, who teaches at the school, texted me and said, that he had heard something. And then everyone I think I've ever met in my life texted me from outside the school, and they were watching the news and they were online and they were doing all these things and had more information than I did. So we were getting a lot of our information from outside, on cell phones and texts and things like that. I think the administrative team was more focused on how to solve the problem that was going on rather than communicating with us, which they should have been. So we were getting most of our information from outside, and we weren't sure. A lot of the information we were getting was not accurate, but nobody really knew exactly what was happening until afterwards. So.
In your time there, did you ever actually meet the shooter?
I did not meet him. I had seen him, but I did not meet him. Didn't know him personally, but I had seen him around campus. Wasn't really familiar with him as a student, though.
Earlier you said that in the moment you keep calm to maintain the peace with your students, and after you feel the emotions. But in the moment, what do you say?
I kept telling them, we're safe. We're safe in here. We're going to be okay. My student whose sister called him and let him know that there was a shooter, he had kind of a freak out moment, as is, it's understandable. And I just told him, you know what, if she's calling you, it means she's okay, right? It means that she's all right, and we're going to be okay. I just sort of kept repeating that to them. And the students who got upset, I would comfort. It was hard to move around because we were in a very small area, but comfort them as much as possible. And then once we were cleared out of the room, we were moved a couple of different times, and then once we evacuated, I stayed with as many of my students as I could find. It sort of was chaos because the entire school was all sort of massed together. But I found as many of them as I could and stayed with them until their parents got there. I had some students who they didn't have their cell phones because they were across the room, and I texted their parents. I said, what's your mom's number? Let me text her. Because as a parent myself, I couldn't imagine what they must have been going through to not know what was happening and not be able to get in touch with their kids. So we kept sort of busy doing those things. And they were on social media. They were on, the news, trying to figure out what all was going on. So we kept sort of busy and tried to keep it together throughout.
Yesterday, the sheriff said that the school resource officer was there and outside the building and did not come in. Did you know about that prior to yesterday, and what do you think?
I read probably the same article that you did yesterday, and I can't really speak to that because I don't know all of the circumstances. So I haven't seen the video. I found out about it probably the same way that you did. So I don't want to necessarily, if that is the case, it is upsetting. But I do think that in situations like this, it's very easy to vilify people and say, so-and-so should have done this, so-and-so should have, and he's a human being, just like all of us are. And I think it's important not to necessarily attack him before we know the facts. And, so I think I'd need more information about that before I really was able to speak to that issue.
What do you think of the acts of heroism by your fellow teachers?
I think that it's amazing. I think that, we all want to say, oh, if I were in this situation, I would do this, or I would, and these people, these three teachers, coaches, administrators, they did it. They put their own lives in danger for their students. And that is, such an amazing thing. And it's so sad that, there were all these funerals this week that, it was just such an amazing thing. And so sad that they had to be in that position, but it's definitely heroic that they did what they did and saved the lives that they did.
There was the football coach. I talked to one of his former students who lives in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. Did you know him? Can you say a few words about him?
I did not know him. It's a large faculty, so we, I knew of him and I would see him. We might say a few words to each other, but I didn't know him well at all. I do know that the students loved him. He was sort of he was happy all the time, always smiling, just an all-around great guy from what I understand. Very supportive of the students, especially the students on his team. But I didn't know him personally very well.
We talked a little about the roles of teachers. You mentioned that teachers are not just educators, but they're counselors and they're surrogate parents sometimes, it seems. And now they, heaven knows, some might even become more of a security guard role. I want to know what you think the role of teachers, how the role of teachers should change because of this incident.
I think that teachers, I think I mentioned this before, we often get sort of bogged down in the subject matter that we have to cover, and it's sort of business, and a lot of times we forget that we are important in the lives of these children, not just as educators, but also as role models, as people. And I think that it's important to take the time to foster that in the classroom and to allow your students sort of the ability to share their feelings and things like that. We can't, not teach, of course, but it's definitely, we need to let them know that we're people too, and that, we support them not only academically, but in, emotionally and all those ways as well.
So a call for more compassionate and empathetic teachers?
I think more empathy is what we need everywhere, across the board. So I definitely, would call for empathy among teachers, among grown-ups. I think that we don't have a lot of that, unfortunately. So yes, more empathy, certainly. Thank you.
And if you want to, did you want to address anything? Would you like to take some questions? You feel comfortable? Sure.
Do me a favor and just say your name again and spell it.
Okay. Morgan Schreiber, MorganSchreiber.
If you could first tell us how you heard about what happened and what your thoughts immediately went to.
So I had just gotten back from class, and I got a text in my family group chat. My mom had texted that there was like a suspected shooter at school, and so like going to Douglas, we always have like drills and stuff like that for like a code yellow drill or a code red drill, so I like didn't really like think much of it. So I took a shower and got ready to like do some homework, and I come back and I have like 12 missed calls from my mom and a bunch of texts from my brother, who was in the school during the shooting. He was in the building that it happened in. So I got this text from him that said, there's a shooter in the school. If you don't hear from me, I love you. And that was like one of the scariest things I've ever heard, but it happened. So
What was the next text you got from him?
I had texted him a bunch, didn't hear from him, and then I get a text, in a closet, I'm safe. So I just had to wait, and then my mom called me that she had picked him up, and I heard his voice, and that's like when I started to feel like relief. So
What do you think, looking at this, that happened at your school that you were at just a year ago?
you like always see this type of situation on the news, and you like don't think much of it just because like you want to help, but it never really affected you, and then it does. And there's really not much to think, just because like your mind is so numb. Like you want to be there, you want to go home, you want to be with your family, with your town, you want to do as much as you can, but like there's only so much you can do from like halfway across the country. So it was just like a hard situation to deal with.
Do you intend to go into education? Are you an education major as well?
Yeah, I'm in the TAL program, which is teaching all learners. So I'll be getting my degree in both elementary and special education.
And that hasn't changed because of any of this?
I actually think it might be more encouraging, which is kind of odd to think about, but you don't go into teaching if you don't have a passion for helping. And I think that it's so important to be able to help these students, be able to help the people that were affected. And like, it's scary. It is, because unless something changes, it's only going to get worse, and it can only happen more unless something happens and something changes. So you need to be prepared for it, of course, but I think that a certain type of person is the type of teacher that you want, and I'm hoping that I am that type of person. So,
What do you want to see change?
well, a lot of my classmates from last year went to Tallahassee, which is the state capital. They tried to implement change, tried to fight for reform, and I mean, we're still working on it, but I just want to see like less school shootings. Honestly, that's all you can ask for right now.
Do you have an opinion on the arming teachers discussion?
I really don't think it's a good call to action. I think that using guns as a means to fix a gun problem is not a smart idea. Obviously, I don't have much knowledge on the topic, but I just don't think it's a good idea. I don't think that it's going to change anything or help in any way. Thanks.
Morgan, how old is your brother? What grade is he in?
He's a freshman. He's 15 years old.
What's his name?
Garrett, Garrett, Schreiber. Same last name. Physically, he's okay. Mentally, he's not in the best state of mind, but my family's coming up here today, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to have a heart-to-heart with him, see what I can do to help in any way possible, so.
Were they already scheduled to be here, or
Yeah, if they weren't scheduled, then I would try my best to go home, but they were planning on coming anyway, so it's good.
Do we know when school's reopening for students?
Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this coming week, students will be back, I believe, for half days. I think they're sort of trying to ease them into the idea of being back on campus, and they are allowing students also to come on campus on Sunday with their parents, just to sort of, I think, experience that first rush of emotions that they're going to have when they get back onto campus for the first time. And so that's on Sunday, and then we'll be back for half days Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.